Welcome to the last session of the global relay of Terra Madre 2020. This is a virtual relay in 5 parts that crosses time zones and continents. Basically, a global dialogue on the big questions of our age with experts coming from all over the world. My name is Kanoki Israel, and I'm an urban farmer in Sacramento, and I'm happy to be part of Terra Madre 2020, our food, our planet, and our future. In Sacramento, California, I started urban farming around 2008, 2009. And the reason why I started working with the land is based on 2 generations of family history, where I have a great grandfather on my father's side who was a farmer in Texas. And it seemed to skip a couple of generations and end up with me. But more personally, as I grew up, I saw certain things happen with my parents. Those things were health problems. Both of my parents have had cancer. And in going to the doctor, they told me that at some point, I'd probably get cancer too because it's in genetics. And so what I realized is that in addition to genetics, we pass down these things to our children, and they're called habits. And I saw that my parents' eating habits were some of the reasons why they were suffering from some of these diseases. In the community that I live, it's a food desert. And so there's no places to get fresh vegetables within miles in some cases. And so I decided that I wanted to start growing food in my own backyard so I could break that cycle. And so since 2009, we've been doing things such as teaching people how to grow their own food, also teaching them how to cook the food, and then at the same time focusing on the youth. Because if we don't start with our young people, then our future is going to be bleak. Also, I'm going to lead you through this journey, this last step of our journey, having that will end in North America. After hearing from our networks in Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, South America, now it's time to turn the focus on the relationship between food, education, and social justice. This conversation today will focus on food education, equity, inclusion, and justice, and how oppression is deeply rooted in all American systems, especially the food system. And so we're affirming our commitment to make Slow Food an anti-racist organization, which truly aims to guarantee good, clean, and fair food for all. With this conversation, we're going to have Alice Waters, Leah Penniman, and Matthew Rayford as figures who've contributed to create a more sustainable and fairer food system. We're going to start with Leah Penniman. I've had the pleasure of being able to introduce Leah Penniman here in San Francisco, and have had the pleasure of being able to see her do her thing in Sacramento, California. Um, she's a farmer, educator, and author of the book called Farming While Black, Soul Fire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. She's also a 2019 recipient of the James Beard Foundation Leadership Award, and she's a Black Creole farmer who has been organizing for an anti-racist food system for over 15 years. Leah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here. It's really an honor to be amongst these brilliant minds and strong hearts.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to start out with a question. I'm going to pose a question to you today, and I'm just going to ask you. So you've dedicated your life to racial justice, building an anti-racist food system for over 15 years. Can you tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced as a woman and a young Black farmer?
I like it. We're starting light, right? The challenges of being a Black farmer in America are many.
Right.
Well, I'll start with a personal one, and then maybe I'll zoom out to systemic challenges. Because the thing is, when I started farming as a teenager back in the 90s, I was like you. I got the bug. I fell in love, from the first time of hoeing a row of carrots and seeing, that beautiful crumbly soil yielding, rich dark orange nutrition for the community. I mean, what can be better? What could be better, right? And I started attending all of these farming conferences. Everything I could get my hands on, I read. I went to the workshops, I went to the keynotes. And it didn't take long for me to realize that there weren't a lot of folks who looked like me or had a life experience like mine in that organic, regenerative farming world. The presenters were white men. The authors on those book tables were white men. And I started to have a lot of doubts, wondering if, I'm a pretty intelligent person, I'm a hard worker. So was I being a traitor to my people and choosing this path of life on land, of sustainable agriculture? Maybe I should be focused on uh, the impacts of gun violence on our community. Maybe I need to be focused on, education disparities. So what am I doing here messing around with some tomatoes, right? And I started to really uh, reconsider that choice, even though it was my heart. And fortunately, one of my mentors, Karen Washington of Rise and Root Farm, Black Urban Growers, and now the president of the board of Soulfire Farm. Congratulations, Mama Karen. She saw me at one of those conferences when I was a wee one. And she said, Leah, it will not be long until we have a book that uplifts our contributions to farming. It will not be long until we have a conference of our own where we can come together and share ideas and support each other. And little did we know back at the time that I would write one of those books and she would start one of those conferences, right? But I think the point there is that for so long we have been taught that all of these things we cherish as organic growers, things like raised beds and compost, things like cover crops and polycultures, slow food even, that these are somehow white Western concepts or even ahistorical. And what was so important for me in that journey of healing personally was to research and understand that Black people's relationship to land is not only defined by slavery, sharecropping, and convict leasing, but we actually have a many thousands of year history of noble, dignified relationship to land. The Ovambo people of Namibia are the ones first documented to make raised beds, right? Cleopatra, the first composter in Egypt. We have the Fanya Juve terraces of Kenya, which are amazing at erosion control and carbon sequestration. Over 70 polyculture combinations just in Nigeria alone. And so there are so many technologies, not to mention when you get to the United States, George Washington Carver, the father of regenerative in this nation, Booker T. Watley, the father of farm to table and the CSA, the community supported agriculture. So it was very important for me to understand and uplift these stories. Now, of course, it's not just about personal motivation and belonging. Being a Black farmer in the United States, there's also a lot of structural challenges there. For folks who don't know, at the end of chattel slavery's legal demise, there was a promise made to Black Americans recently emancipated of 40 acres and a mule. Now, this promise was never fulfilled. It was rescinded. And in fact, reparations were given to those who owned, quote, slaves in the DC area for lost property. So despite all this, our ancestors actually had to save their own money to purchase almost 16 million acres by 1910. And we have since lost nearly all of that acreage, not by choice, but because the federal government itself has systematically discriminated against Black farmers, because white supremacist groups like the Klan and the Whitecaps systematically lynched and destroyed the homes of Black farmers because they threatened the plantation economy, drove them off the land, stole their deeds. And now we're struggling with corporate land grabs by retirement companies of Black farmland. So that context of land theft, of the government really not being on your team, in fact, trying to undermine your sovereignty, is what I came into. And so as a young person, I don't know if you all experienced this, but I didn't always think about things in a systems way. I would think, oh, it's just my personal problem. If my teachers give me the side eye when I walk into an honors class, that's my personal problem. It has nothing to do with race or gender, right? But when you educate yourself, when I educate myself, I start to understand one of the reasons that we do own land collectively, which I'm very proud of after many generations of landlessness in our family, but we own, our government classifies soils. They rank them from best to worst on a 13-point scale. Our soil is the worst, right? We're in the mountains, it's cold. There are Trump flags flying everywhere. The soils are thin and heavy clay. So this is the land, if we can get land, and I know that I'm in that fortunate 10%, the type of lands we can afford, contaminated with lead, highly eroded and degraded. And so we start behind, in terms of entering the market. And so those are some personal challenges. I mean, I share a lot of challenges that all farmers have with, pests and climate change and crop loss, and all of that touches us deeply. But I will say, on a hopeful note, is that my daughter Nashima, who's, I can't believe now, a high school graduate, she says, Mom, the food system is everything it takes to get sunshine onto your plate. So I like to think about this whole arc of intervention, of how we can fix and address these disparities in the food system, right? It's not just about land ownership. It's about how our farm workers treated. It's about food apartheid. In other words, who has access to safe, healthy, culturally appropriate food, right? It's about corporate control versus people control. It's about honoring the earth. And because we have personally experienced, we the Soul Fire Farm team have personally experienced so many of these points of oppression and alienation in the food system, we are well positioned to fight back. And so we have dedicated our entire lives to this. I mean, we are running training programs for that next generation of Black and brown farmers. We're advocating for the rights of farm workers. We're delivering free and low cost food to people who need it in the community in a dignified manner that honors relationship, helping to build urban gardens, many of the things that you all are doing too. And writing books, speaking, trying to get the word out. And it's been really powerful to see recently, the candidates for the Democratic nomination, they all reached out to all of us to ask, what does a platform look like on agriculture? That is something that would have been inconceivable a decade ago, to have people at that level of power looking to Black farmers for guidance about the next steps in our food system. So I am hopeful. And when I do get discouraged, I always think about, my great, 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 great grandmas who were, on the shores of West Africa, watching their families get kidnapped, snatched up, forced into slave ships. And they had that audacious courage to pick up their seeds, their cowpea, their black rice, their egusi melon, right? Braid those seeds into their hair as insurance for their children and for future generations. So if they can face that and save those seeds for us, then we also have to remember to gather up our physical and metaphorical seeds and braid them into our hair so we have something to pass on down. So the challenges are big, but any problems that humans create, humans can undo. So we need to work together to create a just and sustainable food system. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Leah. I really enjoyed it. One thing that really stuck out to me during your talk there is the idea of taking agriculture pre-slavery. When we work with youth, we always get that, is, oh, why you want to grow food? That's work that slaves did. Or, that's something that my grandmother did. She was a migrant worker. Why would I want to get into something like that? So being able to give the context before that of how there was the noble and dignified, connection to land is something that's very, very important. In fact, with our youth, we bought every single one of them that came through our program of Farming While Black Book. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Matthew Rayford. He's the executive chef and owner of the Farmer and Larder, which is featured in January 2016's Garden and Gun as one of the South's most exciting restaurants, and most recently served as the program coordinator and associate professor of culinary arts at the College of Coastal Georgia. He's a passionate member of Slow Food, participated in Terra Madre many times, and his motto is to inspire individuals and communities to change the world through food that is good, clean, and fair for all. Welcome, Matthew. And to guide this, I want to ask a question. And that question is, how can a cook be an agent of change, i.e. a real influence on the future of agriculture and therefore the planet, orienting it towards greater sustainability?
Yeah, listening to what Leah said, I kind of had some flashbacks to my younger years, and even the conversation that you just mentioned about going back to that slave work. So I'm gonna give a little bit of my background so I can work into what that vision actually looks like. So I was raised in Brunswick, Georgia, which is considered to be the Deep South. And we're exactly 29 miles from the Florida state line. I can remember at the age of 10, which was exactly 43 years ago, my mom taking me to a store and I telling my mom I had to use the bathroom and them telling my mom that they didn't have a place for that little black boy to go pee in, literally. So that was 43 years ago here in Brunswick, Georgia. So I totally understand that conversation because I lived through some of that Ku Klux Klan that Leah was talking about and watching them actually march through the streets of Brunswick. I have lived through wanting to leave the South and saying to myself, I ain't never, ever going back, and I ain't never, ever doing any of that work because guess what? It has some real stigmatism to it. And I remember my Nana, before she passed in 2016, for years she had been saying, baby, what are we going to do with all this land? And I kept saying, y'all should go back to farming it because that's what y'all know how to do. And when I wanted to be a cook, my dad had been a baker by trade from the 50s and 60s, and he had never seen a black man ever make it to executive status, let alone own his own that wasn't considered to be a mom and pop joint, like a really nice upscale style restaurant. He'd never seen it. And so he was like, there's a lot of things you can do when I graduated from high school. He said, but cooking ain't one of them. So I grew up with a mentality that if I was to stay in the South, I wasn't going to live long because I had a lot of mouth, a lot of attitude, and my voice was this deep when I was 13. So people always thought I was talking back, even though I was just like, even if I said, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. I also knew the back-breaking work. Literally, it is to like turn that soil into fertility so that it can produce something. And it wasn't until I said to my Nana, Nana, I think we should go back to farming. So that bug bit me like it bit you and Leah. And I was quite older at that point. I was like 40 something years old. And I'd always loved eating fresh foods and all those kinds of things. And I had, I went in the military for 10 years, got out of the military, went to culinary school at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. And I remember always hearing my instructors talk about the great cooks and of the world. They always knew their farmer. And in my head, I was like, wait. So the greats always knew their farmer. The greats also always, their story starts with their grandmother or their aunt or some matriarchal kind of thing of who like put them in front of food. And I all of a sudden started thinking to myself, that is Black folks' story inside and out. We always been touching the land. We always had a big mama, a nana, a mom duke, somebody that was like over the food and took care of the family. And it started to swell up in me that there was this thought process that we weren't there. Like we had been written out of history, that we had been written out of all of these things that we actually produced. And I'm going to use, I really love the story that Leah just gave about the braiding of the hair and the sea. And I want us to think about the things that have been lost and the thought process of it. And I'm going to use the pineapple as my start. So the pineapple is the international symbol of hospitality. Internationally, big hotels have pineapples. And that thought process comes from the Caribbean. If you wanted to travel and find a place to restore yourself, you look for a place that had a pineapple on like a stick, and that meant you could stop by that place and eat, find, housing and all of those kinds of things. We have been written so far out of history that we don't believe that we did those contributions, that we are part of that seed saving, that we are part of that informational system, that we are part of the great cooks. And when I think about having a clear vision, I believe that now all cooks, regardless of race and color, should actually go back to the root of where did that collard green come from? Why are we eating grits? Why are we creating these dishes and creating these things and taking them up to this haute type of cuisine that are actually the cuisine of the people? Like shrimp and grits? I mean, come on, like who pays? I never thought that anybody would pay $30 for a plate of shrimp and grits. There is no shrimp and or grits that fall into that. And I think because we've allowed ourselves to not quite understand that history of food, where things come from, how all those things come together, that vision of like where things are, we've allowed to like escape us in some kind of shape, form, or fashion. So the first thing I would say is that we need to have a clear vision of where we're going now. Like we understand what happened in the past. Now we have to have a clear vision of where we are going, what we are doing with all of this knowledge that we now have access to at our fingertips in seconds. After we have that clear vision, we also have to be not just persistent, we got to be patient, because kind of like also what Leah just said a few minutes ago, we got ourselves into this, so we should be able to get ourselves out of it. So we should also like think about that from the stage of how long we are going to work at it. And I take your story as a prime example also, where you say to yourself, I'm going to change the direction of my health because the system is saying because my parents had it, I'm going to have it. Nope, that ain't happening to me. I got to change something. So we have to be persistent at the change, which was done. And then we have to be patient because the outcome ain't going to happen just like that, but it is going to happen. I think the next thing about it is finding out who our tribe is, and that our tribe consists of a very small area, like where you are in Sacramento. But Lee is on the other side of the world. That's still part of your tribe. I'm down on a whole nother side of the world, still part of my tribe. Alice is on another part of the world, still part of my tribe. So I think it's like figuring out who's in our tribe, where the slow food tribe actually is at, and how to connect with it so that it becomes kind of like, instead of it just being like this, it's kind of connected. So when pressure is pushed up against it, it becomes this weave. It becomes this really tight knit. And I see that that's what is going to get us into the future, that we take all of these people that are within our slow food tribe and connect us and figure out how to make things better, because we are trying our best to make things better. And the only way that we do it is if we stay connected and we continue to weave things in. So clear vision, patience and persistence, and weaving, connecting the community together and being strong.
Thank you, Matthew, for those pertinent words. I know for a fact that I didn't start eating healthy really until the food tasted good. Because I know when we first started thinking about, my wife and I, we first started thinking about eating healthy. It was one of those things of, okay, so what are we going to eat now? So we're going vegetarian. So I think our first meal was sauteed spinach, couscous with garlic. And I think that was it for probably like the first 3 weeks as we were trying to figure out what to eat. And I think that, you know, what you're saying when you're talking about restaurants and you've never seen a Black person to have a real fancy restaurant, that type of thing, and then eat the food and it be just this, you know, you're like, man, I wish I could eat that and grow that type of stuff. That's a great way to talk about how cooking can be an agent of change. So thank you for that perspective. Really appreciate that. All right. So now I'm going to hand the floor over to Alice Waters. And she is going to talk, or you're going to talk to us about how, in the context that we're all living, does education play a role in solving and preventing inequalities in the food system? It's all yours.
Well, I can't think of any better place than the public school system, because it's our last sort of truly democratic institution in this country. Everybody has to go to school, or should. And that is the place where we can reach children when they're young and open to learning. So I have been experimenting, shall we say, with this public school in Berkeley for 25 years. It's a middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and there are 1,000 of them. And they speak 22 different languages at home. Now, this is pretty unique for the public school system, but way back in the 70s, Berkeley integrated the school system. And I have to say that the work that we've been doing there has been so enriched by that diversity that I wonder how we can make that happen again, really. But we started out just simply planting a garden. The principal was open to whatever we wanted to do. And I just was so worried about where my kid was going to go to school. And you see how we've industrialized the schools around this country, sort of one size fits all. You know, all the kids that drop out. And it just has so changed in the last 50 years that it's shocking indeed. So we began, though, with a garden classroom, not to teach gardening per se, but to teach the academic subjects. And then we made a kitchen classroom. So when they were studying the history of, for instance, the Middle East, they would be cooking the food of the Middle East. They would be eating hummus and pita bread, or maybe tabbouleh salad or a spicy carrot soup. Maybe they were on the Silk Road in India, learning about the history of that. And they would be making the food and eating it, sort of digesting the cultures of the world. And it has worked like a charm. I'm a Montessori teacher, so I deeply believe in learning by doing. And I believe in an education of the senses. What's happened in this country, and it's what I've written sort of this Slow Food Manifesto about, is about the indoctrination that has happened around fast food. That when we were eating that food, we were eating the values that came along with it. The ideas of everything should be fast, cheap, and easy, available wherever you go. 24/7. You should be able to eat in your car. Everything should be, I mean, I have to emphasize the idea of cheapness, because since the beginning of civilization, food has always been thought of as precious. And all of a sudden, it's like, it's not anymore. It should be cheap and it should be easy to eat. And so how can we teach these slow food values? And there's no better place than the public school system. I really, really believe that. And if we focused on the values of stewardship and nourishment and equality and diversity, and really learned how to teach every subject with that in mind, engage the children with nature, it could happen. And it could happen universally, truly. But we have to be really organized around that. And I think what we're lacking, and what I've loved always about slow food, is that it's a big organizing principle, that the ideas of good, clean, and fair. And so in that sense, we know where we're going, but how exactly do we do that? And I love the Slow Food University that is outside of Bra in Italy, because that is what they're doing, is they're teaching the students there about the cultures of the world and foods of the world. And every person who has graduated from that university, I have found, has become a leader. And when they go back to their own country, they are really doing projects that are engaging people. Like Sarah Wiener with the Good Food Awards is a great example of something that is happening in this country. But the school system is the place.
Thank you so much for that, Alice. Do you have any last comments or anything that you need to say before we get ready to close out the session?
Well, I was thinking that I might read the afterword from this manifesto that I'm writing. The working title is "We Are What We Eat." And this is the last part of that. And I thought I might just finish with it. COVID-19 is wreaking havoc across the globe. Institutions and economies are in shreds. Lives are being dramatically altered. Many are sick and many people have died. It feels very strange at this moment to be talking about coming around the table together, since it's exactly what we've been forbidden to do. But I can't help seeing the whole pandemic through the lens of food. The disease sprang from a food market. We ignored the way in which animals are connected to one another and their habitats. Then the disease spread across the globe unchecked because our denial of our own interconnectedness. What happens in China or Iran or Italy rapidly affects what happens in South Korea or New Zealand or Berkeley, California. Because we wanted all of our industrial supply chains to continue uninterrupted, because of those ingrained values of speed, convenience, and availability, the disease spread further still. And the disease has been prolonged to a great extent because of our misplaced trust in advertising, both in what we're being told about the disease itself and the mixed messages about what to do about it. And yet still the fast food culture is relentlessly trying to make a profit, reinforcing and getting financing for the structures, the institutions, and supply chains that got us here in the first place. The same ones that are pushing us towards a climate disaster. The silver lining, though, as in all times of upheaval, is that there is a real opportunity for alternatives. People feel the urgency and the need to connect to the power of nature through food. This is the time to rise to the occasion. Together we can create local regenerative networks that will be economically stronger, more vibrant, flexible, secure, responsive, resilient, more resilient than the industrial scaled up versions that we've come to rely on. A few months ago, into the pandemic, I saw an article in the New York Times called "The Farm to Table Connection Comes Undone." You may have seen that article. I was struck by how absurd that statement actually is. Because there's no way that the farm to table movement can ever end. Because there's no way, it's impossible. There has always been a farm to table connection. There has to be, by definition. We all get our food from somewhere and always have. The only thing that has ever changed over time are the questions of what farm and what table. In fact, most crises, as we have seen, are rooted in the disconnects we have with these questions. It is our dilemma every time we eat. What farm? What table? What kind of future do we want to create? What kind of society? What kind of planet? Slow food values are our shared natural legacy. They're inside of all of us. They have power, and they're just waiting to be awakened in us. It just takes a taste. It just takes a taste. An early girl tomato at this moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice, for those words. Really kind of just highlights and kind of brings and weaves together everything that we've talked about today. Whether we're coming from New York, or whether we're coming from Georgia, Sacramento, or Berkeley, I think the main thing that we see here between all of this is that we are connected. And so as we continue to call the earth our mother, right? And we do this all the time when we talk about plants, because plants have different families and species and genus and all those different types of things. But one thing that we do know with that, they're all related and they've all come from one place, right? And so even with the things that we're talking about here with Matthew and your being a chef and the experiences that you've had, and Leah with your experiences in going to certain types of areas and seeing that, you know, you were the only woman of color there, Black woman there, that was, you know, trying to figure out how this can be used for, you know, resistance and how to deal with, you know, the oppression that you saw. And then also having to see that culminated within a public school, which, you know, I've been to the Edible Schoolyard Project, so I've seen how it works, and I've seen how the children sit around the table and all talk about different cultural foods and actually cook those foods. I think that what we're seeing is, once again, that everything is connected. And so once again, as the earth being our mother, then we are her children, and we are also all related. And so if we don't be good children, right, to take care of our mother, then what she will do is she will then set off retributive things to happen in order to punish us. And so if we don't start to really look at this interconnection, because think about it, I mean, if you look at a salad, right, a salad is a great way to look at a harmony, right? The tomatoes are not mad at the lettuce because, people like to eat the lettuce first, and you got, the sprouts, they're always usually an afterthought, but you don't see them complaining about those things. So you see that harmony put together, but all together, once you put a little bit of dressing on it and you eat it, it tastes great. And so I think that all of our experiences have been able to bring out a flavor of what we're talking about. And so with that, I think that the message that should go out is wherever you are, whoever you are, and wherever you may find yourself, that there's something that you can do. And in finding your tribe and finding those people that are like-minded, now with COVID-19 and the ability to pull up a computer screen and have people from different parts of the United States in a room at the same time, that we can use these to start to create the connections that will create this resiliency that you were talking about, Matthew. So I want to thank you for your precious contributions, Matthew, Leah, and Alice, and focus how you helped us to focus and understand the importance of good, clean, and fair food. And fair is just not a word that we need to throw around, but also we have to realize that we have to create the conditions for this conversation to happen for real. And then the conversation has to go further than the conversation, and it has to then turn into action. And so these are all types of topics that will be highlighted during the 6 months of Terra Madre. And so this Terra Madre Global Relay has come to an end. However, the Terra Madre 2020 program has just started. I want to thank everyone who's being with us. Thank you so much. Keep following Terra Madre, both digital and on the event website and locally in your communities. Bye-bye and Viva Terra Madre.
Peace, everyone. Take care.
Peace.
Hey.
Buena Chimbila.